So we come on to the last session for the day, which will be a fireside chat, which will be led by Mr. Kumar Sharma, and along with him, we'll have Mr. Galla on stage too. Mr. Galla is a co-founder and chairman of Amara Group, and they would be discussing about ticking all the boxes and playing the long game. Let's understand what is the topic all about. Thank you.
So thank you, Jay, for your time. It's really nice that you've come all the way from Tirupati, and we are also happy to know that the laddus are safe there. So while you know, the reason to actually have you spend time here is to, while most of the day today we have been spending time trying to talk to CFOs and understand their perspective from different angles. Right now we had a session on ethics, governance. Prior to that we had on digital transformation. Prior to that again we had on technology and adoption and the challenges and all of that. From your perspective, from your vantage point as a promoter, as a leader who has CEOs, CFOs, and you've grown organizations, we need to look at a larger and a more deeper way to look at this whole ecosystem where we have a CEO and a CFO and all changing roles all the time. So when we all know that it's not really about thinking out of the box, but ticking all the boxes, as we discussed earlier as well, to look at different aspects of technology and all of that, therefore. How do you, as from your vantage point, see us creating that culture within that organization where, this can be nurtured, this environment where, the CFO is getting onto newer roles, CEO aligning himself constantly and getting to leverage this CFO for not just the P&L, but governance, value mindset, or whatever. If you can start from there, it will be well.
Sure. Thank you, Kumar. Good afternoon, everyone. I think I'm the last speaker today after a long session, so hopefully people are still paying some attention. But to answer that, Kumar, I think I need to probably look back at my own journey and our organization's journey. We're not a very, very old organization in that sense. It's still, my father was the founder of the Amara Group, and I joined him very early on, within the first 5 years of its founding, back in 1992. So I've been on that journey as a first-generation entrepreneur, along with my father. Even though I'm second generation in the family, I think we both worked together as first-generation entrepreneurs. So back then in the early 90s, I think, if anybody is here old enough to remember how business was back in the days before
I used to see both of you travel together to different geographies.
Yes, yes. I mean, we started the company just before the economic liberalization. So we saw the entire transformation of the economy and the economic environment. I came in '92 to India after having spent 22 years in the United States. And so I was coming in right at the stage where the economic liberalization had just begun. The transformation was just taking place, early stages of taking place. So though we started out under the license Raj, our first venture was given a license by the central government to start making valve-regulated lead-acid batteries. But even before we started the business and came into production, that had been dismantled. And so the protections and everything else that came along with that were gone. So I think that's an important thing to remember, is the transition of the economy from a controlled, closed economy to a more open, competitive economy, transformed the roles of many executives and many different functions in the country. For the first time, it wasn't just a cost-plus exercise to sell your products, where everything was protected and you're assured of a certain price, a certain market, a certain demand, as long as you stuck to the guidelines that the government had to offer. So there's very little room for anybody to really innovate or do anything, and there was very, very little incentive also to do that. So in those days, a finance function was an accounting function. Finance and accounts was the name of the function also. And you had head of finance, or who then eventually became GM finance, who eventually became vice president finance. But really, the finance function was only an accounting job in those days. Financial
Confined only to
controlling,
spreadsheets.
financial controlling, auditing, cost control, the standard routine requirements, which are extremely important. I'm not diminishing the need for accounting and cost control and things like that, but that's not the end all and be all of the function. So I think we've seen over the years, as we've grown, from a startup to a 100 crore company, to a 1,000 crore company, to a $1 billion company, and moving forward, every function is becoming more strategic in nature. Earlier, when you're in a startup, especially in a tech-based startup or an engineering-based startup like ours, it's all about operations, engineering, and marketing. Everything else is secondary. Everything else is kind of just, okay, it's required to do business, therefore it's there, but the functions don't really perform beyond the necessary requirements to actually transact the business. The real strategy and driving force tend to be in operations, engineering, and in marketing and sales. And that's how the company started. But as we started getting larger, strategic functions, the functions that needed to be made strategic, like finance, like human resources, like information systems, like supply chain, also started to get a lot more focus and brought into, the organization and the leadership team started to recognize the importance of all of these functions playing a strategic role. Now, around 2004, when I became the managing director of this company, prior to that, I was executive director reporting to my father, who was the founder chairman. And his approach, like many companies in those days, was more of a command and control type of management style. When I took over, I tried to change the entire approach to more a collaborative leadership style. And to do that, first I had to get my father out of the way. So I banned him from attending the meetings and going to the shop floor for almost 2 years until I got things, the changes that I wanted implemented. And, from then onwards, we looked at the executive team, finance, HR, supply chain, quality, not just marketing and sales, but all of these different functions that make up a executive committee was formed. They were developed, and we started working as a team. We were meeting regularly once a week, doing weekly reviews, monthly reviews, quarterly reviews, even daily reviews for half an hour, 1 hour at a time, initially when we first started. And one of the things I made clear to everyone is that you may have your functional responsibilities when you leave this room, you're wearing a functional hat, but when you come into this room and we meet as an executive committee, everybody's equal, regardless of rank. Somebody may be a senior manager, somebody may be a vice president, depending on the function. But in that room, they're equal. There's no functional silos to be maintained. Anybody can question anybody on anything. You shouldn't feel offended if somebody asks you a question saying, I don't ask you about marketing, why are you asking me about finance? Type of responses should not be there. And we're there to challenge each other, support each other, help each other out, and finally come up with meaningful solutions and meaningful ways forward for the group. So I think that took some time to develop. It required some changes in people also, changes in the sense that some people had to change, and people who couldn't change had to be removed. Otherwise, they'd be holding back the entire team. So there were some tough decisions made while we were progressing in that way. But I think overall, we've been able to develop in that way, and I think it's really made a big difference for us.
Yeah, good point, actually. I think, and you gave the context to what eventually led to what is it currently now. But this key to what you said was also this executive committee structure, which I think so. My question initially was nurturing an environment so that this is fostered. So this forming a new kind of structures where we have like this executive committee, is that the way to kind of incentivize and leverage CEO's new role?
Yeah, sure. I mean, structure is very important. I mean, structure follows strategy, not the other way around. So you actually have to start with strategy and then figure out what type of structure is going to help you to implement that strategy. So, structure is very important, but processes are another thing that we really focused on. And, how we brought everybody onto that platform is through our strategic planning process that we also initiated around that time, where we start looking at every year as an annual exercise. We go through a 5-year strategic planning process. So we try to have a 20-year vision, a 10-year environment analysis, and a 5-year strategy. Based on that 5-year strategy, which is approved by the board of each different business, then they go into the annual budgeting exercise based on that. So this is repeated every year, not just by adding a year, but re-looking at everything fresh, because a lot of things can happen in 12 months, and what was true 12 months ago is not necessarily true today. You don't just keep incrementally adding 1 year to your strategy. You actually have to re-look at the entire 5-year strategy every year, and that's what we do. And we do that with our executive committees. So the executive committees are the key focal point for conducting that exercise.
While on this same point, actually, if I want to get a sense from you in terms of what is the changed expectations now from CFOs and CEOs also. But before that also, since you are also connected with companies globally, you see the global practices as well. Is there any learning in the way they are kind of putting in structures in place that we can perhaps replicate, given that,
So that, earlier the job of was a financial controller. Controlling was the main objective. And now I think it's enabling is more important than controlling. How do you enable the different parts of the organization to be able to perform and realize the full potential that the organization has at its disposal? The financial controller is no longer a financial controller in that sense, but as a CFO, he's an enabler to enable the organization from a financial and a strategic input that's coming from that role. And they have a broad vision. They're dealing with a lot of stakeholders that the rest of the organization is not dealing with, whether it's shareholders or whether it's bankers or whether it's rating agencies. So many different places where they're getting a lot of feedback about the performance of the organization, which the rest of the organization doesn't necessarily get that touch and that feel. So if something is wrong with the perception of these stakeholders, that will affect the valuation and the value of the company. Valuation is purely based on perception. Perception is based on facts, of course, but ultimately it's sentiment and perception that runs the stock market, especially in India, more than many other hard factors, from what I can tell.
I have a few more questions, but just to keep this interactive, since Roshan is there, the editor, he tracks auto. I would want, and Suman also, we look at auto. Apart from these two particularly, I'm saying since they're from the editorial, please feel free to step in with any of the questions that you have for him in this context that we've been discussing since morning. So one thing which we did discuss this morning, and I want to get this out of the way, and this was because of the kind of scenario that we have. My core question that I'm coming to is strategy, because you mentioned this point about the traditional function of a financial controller, but the sufficient role is that of a strategy. So in terms of strategy, what kind of components are now becoming increasingly important? How is that to be looked at? Maybe let's look at that first before I come to my other questions.
People, capital, material.
The standard.
Right? These are the things that, how to strategically utilize these resources to get maximum, impact. And the impact depends on what metrics you're following. Profit could be the impact you're looking for, but at different points of time, you may be focused on different metrics.
Can you give an example? Strategic looks a very nice word, but if you can just, as an example, say this. Important point, as you said, people, capital, materials, but as an example in terms of...
So I'll tell you, today, it's fairly easy to raise money. I think
Multiple sources are there.
today, the way that the markets are, there's more money than there are ideas. It's money chasing ideas and not the other way around. It's not ideas chasing money. There's plenty of money going around. You have to be able to present your ideas properly, have a good team that has a track record and credibility, and it's very easy to get money. It's very easy to draw up a business plan. But then to execute that business plan, you need people, and you need people, systems, and processes to run that and execute it. So in my mind, people is the most important strategic resource, not money. People is a far more strategic resource. Do you build the company that builds the business, or do you build the business that builds the people? So you build the people that build the company, not build the company that builds the people, in my opinion.
So as a promoter, you're saying that essentially it's about people, and people who know how to raise capital, who know how to do who are more investor savvy, people who can make the right pitch, people who can deal with different types of money sources and can raise low-cost funds easily.
And people who can execute.
And people who can execute. So all these multiple skills. So you can't just buy off the shelf, isn't it? So what is it that you do? What's the secret sauce to build this, apart from the structure part?
So I think for that, there are several things that are required for that. One is you have to have a very, very strong base of incoming employees. You have to be building people right from entry level onwards. Having a very strong depth in each function is important. Because I remember, GE may not be the best example nowadays, but they used to say in GE, when a CEO quits, they hire a fresh graduate to replace him, because everybody else moves up. Now, I don't think it's going to be that regimented, but conceptually, that's the way it ought to be, right? You should be promoting talent from within the organization if you lose a top person, and you shouldn't be just replacing them by going and buying someone in the market. That's how it should be. But not every organization is going to be like that, nor should it be that way, I guess, anymore. But you need to have a strong base to build on, and you need to know where you have weaknesses, where you have gaps in capabilities, and be able to recruit laterally to fill those gaps so that everyone in that organization benefits from that knowledge. So I would say that starting with creating talent from the base is one thing, having a strong organization with good depth in each function so that it can absorb the type of crisis and pressures and both positive and negative that may be coming up. You need that capability to be able to handle those kind of pressures. In addition to that, I think you need to give them, as they grow in their careers, what they're learning from you is good, but they also need some additional external development, support, whether that's by sending them to training and development programs to, management institutions, or whether that's bringing trainers into the organization to do a larger
For example,
exercise.
what did you do? For example, is there anything that you've done?
For middle management, we've had programs, we've developed programs to help people transition from entry to middle management, and then from middle management to upper management. Before they actually get that promotion, they actually go through a module. Sometimes we do it with an entire batch of managers at IAMs or ISB. We've done it in various different places.
Okay. Yeah, please. Roshan. Yeah.
You're coming up with this new 16 gigawatt hour, battery manufacturing plant in Telangana, lithium-ion battery pack, which, you've said that. I think this is probably one of the first projects where you're looking at external funding. Otherwise, it's all been internally funded so far for Amara Raja. Why is this again part of the new thinking?
No. Let me correct you. We've funded all of our projects.
Yeah.
We happen to be debt-free at the moment.
Yeah.
So the way that Amara Energy and Mobility has been growing in a very consistent way, in a very settled industry till now, lead acid battery industry, we've been able to take loans, expand the capacities, and pay back those loans generally within 12 to 18 months. So it's, we keep going from debtor to debt-free every time we go for an expansion. We haven't had the need to go to the public or to any other agency to expand equity for quite some time. We've been able to do it with both debt and internal accruals.
Okay. And
now, as far as the Giga plant that we're setting up in Telangana, that's been structured so it's a step-down subsidiary of Amara Energy and Mobility. Okay. And we do intend to go for fundraising, not for the first phase, which we can handle on our own, but we want to build some value this time in the business before we go for public. The last time our group went for a public issue was in 1991, when we went during the Gulf War just to implement the very first project, and we went at 10 rupee par value. We never want to do that again. So we want to build up some good value in the business and then go for the external funding to go into the next phase of expansion.
Okay, I was coming from the point of view, this being CFO Connect Summit, and the role your CFO plays in taking such decisions and having kept the company debt-free all these years. That's
it's not intentional. It's just that we haven't been. I would say, I feel we've been growing fairly aggressively. We're now at about getting to almost $2 billion turnover. When I took over in the early 2000s, I think we had a $50 million turnover. So the CAGR has been a very good growth track. Could we have been more aggressive? Certainly. I mean, we could have been more aggressive. We could have got into a lot of unrelated diversifications. Some of them might have done well. Some of them might not have. But we've not been that aggressive that way.
Good to know. It lasts like your batteries last long, ting tong, as they say.
But at the same time, while we haven't diversified beyond our core in energy and mobility in the listed company, as a group, we've diversified quite a bit into other things through separate entities, not through this company.
One more thing which we did, this is of course going a bit tangential, but we did discuss this in the morning with the CEOs and the promoters, was this question about the ethics part of it. The exact question which I had asked them was, how do you ensure that you are sleeping peacefully at night knowing that your books are clean? So this is, I mean, in today's context, when one of the in the AA economy that India is being projected as sometimes by the West, is there are questions about how practices are being done or whatever. So how do you ensure that?
So, when we looked at ethics, there's two ways you can go about it. You can make a lot of rules, you can have a lot of audits, and make sure people are following the rules is one approach, which you can't completely escape from. But that's not the only way, and that's not necessarily the best way. I think you're building a culture that rejects unethical behavior at every level, building a strong culture in the organization so that somebody who is not ethical cannot survive in that system. It may not be the manager or the managing director who has to take action. The system will reject and flush them out, just like foreign body that gets into your body, how the body reacts and flushes and rejects. That's the way the culture has to take care. And I think if you build a strong culture like that, while you have the financial controls, the audits, and everything else that's set up to monitor things, those are still required, but you won't have to actually encounter those type of issues very frequently if you have a strong culture. So we built, I believe, a very strong culture. I remember in the 90s when I was looking at, thinking about succession and how my father was working. Back then we had just, one plant in one facility in Tirupati, and every day he used to walk the shop floor in the morning and evening. He knew people by name. He would, sign every check, go through every letter that came in his name, and, forward it to whoever he felt like forwarding it to. So he was going through that routine day in and day out. And I realized that I can't work like that. I mean, even if I wanted to, as we start expanding into multiple locations and multiple places, it becomes impossible. That becomes the job of a facilities man, the head of a location rather than a CEO or a managing director's job at that point of time. So how do we retain that touch, and how do we retain the culture that he's ingrained in the organization while we continue to grow, was what we are, trying to grapple with. And I realized the only way that we can do that is to institutionalize that culture and his values in the organization. So we went on a very serious exercise of trying to, what I call, discover our purpose and values, not create, because we were already a running organization by that time. My father had moved back to India with a certain purpose in his mind, why he wanted to come back and start this group, and with a certain set of values. So it was just about, discovering what was on his mind, because he doesn't articulate very well. His English is poor and his Telugu is even worse, from what I understand. So he's not a great communicator from a language perspective. But trying to grasp what he's doing and distill that and verbalize it was what we did. And we came up with what we called the Amara way, which you've been exposed to. If you want me to talk about that, I can, but I don't know if we have enough time to get into that. There's a much longer conversation.
Yeah. The other 2 points, and I think before if there are any questions I'll take, essentially, see, when we talk of managing the future here, with the dynamism of costs, there are areas where you need to invest for the future, and the revenue is not known, especially in your field. There are instances where you need to take a call on investments which will yield results 5 years from now or 6 years from now, and revenues are right now not known. And so the product design issue, marketing, product investments. So how do you ensure that there is confidence in the CFO that these decisions can be taken? Because these are dealing with a lot of unknowns.
Yeah, I think, if we look at investment into lithium ion is a very good example of that. I've had money burning a hole in my pocket for a decade wanting to invest into lithium ion, but timing just wasn't right. If I had invested 10 years ago, it would have been a very wrong decision. So what is the right time to invest? Timing is critical for these type of investments where there's not an existing demand, but you're betting on a trend, you're betting on something that's going to change in the market, and being part of that trend or leading that trend, when to make that investment. If you're too early, you're going to be sitting on assets that you can't utilize properly. And if you invest too late, you might have missed the bus. You lose the first mover advantage. So really, we're waiting and watching very carefully. And we finally pulled the trigger when the government announced the PLI scheme. Before that, I would say that it was still too early. But once the PLI scheme was announced, people started moving. Whether the market was ready for it or not, that was the gun went off and we had to run, right? So we also reacted from that and started moving very quickly from that onwards. But we had been preparing for that for a decade. It wasn't the PLI that triggered our move. The PLI was the catalyst that let that got the ball rolling. But we had been preparing and evaluating and waiting for that moment for almost a decade.
Yeah. But I'm sure you've done all the due diligence and looked at the different aspects of it. But just sort of curiosity.
So, in doing that, again, it's a team approach. It's not, CEO versus CFO or the rest of the team versus the CFO. It's a team. We're working together to make those decisions.
Yeah. But just out of curiosity, as a journalist, we like to throw in our own bit of story reporting and news element. This PLI scheme, do you think this is incentive enough? Because it's
No.
still loaded on a lot of incentives.
No, it's not a very good scheme in the sense that there's more risk of penalties than the benefits that you can get from that scheme. So in that sense, it's a very risky scheme for somebody to quote very aggressively. But it set the ball rolling. It started creating that momentum of shifting from IC engine to EV. You can see it, the impact that it had even in the marketplace, where OEs started to actually introduce, it was a chicken and egg situation otherwise. Who has to invest first? The cell maker has to invest first, the OE has to invest first, or the charging infrastructure has to be there first. All three are required. All three have to be set up not necessarily by the same party. So who has to invest first? Nobody was actually taking that call. The PLI scheme acted as a catalyst to get the ball rolling.
And it will be sustainable, you think, even without the incentives? Because at
Yes,
some
we
point...
we didn't benefit from the PLI scheme.
Yeah.
But we're going ahead with our investments. In fact, the people who roll out their first cells in India will not be people who are on that PLI scheme, but probably, we're in the race, and there are several others in the race who I think will probably beat all the PLI winners.
Okay. Sumanna, you have any question?
If I can quote Andy Palmer, he said that for 100 years we graduated from horse carts to the cars of today. But in the last 10 years, in terms of the mobility space, if we see from various battery chemistries, from electric to different kind of fuel, say hydrogen fuel cell, there is a host of options that's coming up as what's going to be the next fuel of the future. So from a CFO's perspective or CEO's perspective, how do you make your business future-proof, or what is your approach?
So first of all, I'm impressed that you know Andy Palmer. For anyone who doesn't know him, he was, I think, chairman of Switch Mobility. Earlier, he was with
Aston Martin.
Ashok Leyland also.
Yeah,
I think he was with
yeah.
Ashok Leyland for a while as well. But he's quite well-known person in the tech circles in the EV industry. So congratulations. We have been, if you look at our business, we have been a lead-acid battery manufacturer, making batteries for IC engine cars and also for industrial applications, energy storage systems, telecom, railways, UPS systems, various other power backups. The lead-acid technology has been around for 100 years. It's likely to be around for another 100 years. I don't know how long lithium-ion is going to last. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years before the next change happens, because technology is moving very fast in that area. The applications where lead-acid may continue to have relevance are applications where space and weight are not a consideration. You can't beat the economics of lead-acid. Where charging time is not such a consideration, lead-acid still would serve the purpose. So when I look at the future in terms of technologies and chemistries, I don't think any one technology or any one chemistry is going to dominate the way that gasoline or diesel has in the past. Anytime, when the demand starts picking up, like if every car suddenly in the world was an electric car that required a lithium-ion battery, I don't know where we would get all those minerals from, even to meet current demand. Forget about future demand. And as the demand picks up for those materials, the costs are going to shoot up. These are commodities. You can't have reduction in cost the way you have in technology in a commodity. And a commodity is required for these. It's not just a technology product. A battery requires a lot of material. And if everything is dependent on one type of material, the cost is going to become prohibitive. So you're going to see different types of chemistries for different types of applications emerge, even from to remain economical. If I don't need all the requirements of a lithium-ion battery, I'm not going to pay that much. I'm going to pay for something, even if it's not as good, because I don't need the functionality, right? So from an economic point of view, I think that it's going to be horses for courses. Like how you choose a horse depending on the course. Are you going up a mountain, you're running a race, you're pulling a wagon? You choose different horses for different applications, and that's how the chemistries are going to be also. It's going to be horses for courses.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. I think, is there, oh, okay. Maybe one question more, can you take? Yeah, please. Kindly identify yourself and a very brief question.
My name is Ivan Isaac. I run a startup called Zazio Systems. My question to you, Dr. Galla, is you said you inherited business from your father, Dr.
No, I built the business with my father. I didn't inherit it.
Okay. From Dr. Ramchandra Galla.
Just to clarify, I joined him before the factory was constructed and before the first battery was sold. I joined the company before that.
You basically are into all particular related to battery manufacturing. The only two businesses that I've seen is out of the businesses. One is media and entertainment and the pulp and beverages business. What was one of the reasons that why did you go completely? Because all your subsidiary companies, you've got about 6 companies, 17 businesses with 18,000 people and 2 billion turnover. Why these two completely off-track thing? That's my first question. And my second question is pertaining to what as a person who has inherited such a large conglomerate, what would be your 3 advices to companies who are setting up or people like us who have got startups?
Okay, let me take your second question first, because otherwise I don't want to forget it. The first one I'll remember easily. So I think the answer to the second question is going to be related to the answer to the first as well, and that is that there's a million ways to make $1 million, right? The opportunities to be an entrepreneur are limitless, especially in a country like India, which is on you're seeing the type of growth that's taking place. It's a question of having a good idea, having a good team, having conviction and courage to maybe suffer a little bit in terms of constraints on time and money while you go through that journey. You should be ready to face those type of hardships, and conviction to go ahead and move ahead, even if it means throwing out the plan and starting all over again, based on what you've learned. So I'm not saying that when I say conviction, I don't mean you have to stick to your original plan, but conviction to keep moving ahead, to keep trying new things. If you fail, get up and try again. So I think, getting into that type of mindset is very important, and surrounding yourself with competent people who you can partner with, who believe in you, believe in the mission, and believe in the vision that you have, I think is very important. Nobody's an island, and it takes teams to produce results. So coming back to the first question, I think it was more accidental than anything else. We happen to be from Chittoor. Chittoor happens to be the mango capital of the world. We happen to be from the farming community. A lot of our family and friends are still in the farming community and growing mangoes. And my father is a farmer at heart. He's grown up on a farm, working on the farm as a child. And he saw that a lot of technological changes were taking place in the fruit processing industry globally. And India wasn't keeping up with these small juice factories all over the place. And farmers weren't getting very good deal in that entire value chain. So he entered more as an honest broker to be in that system, to ensure that there's fair prices, fair payment terms, and everything else. 25% of the global production of mangoes takes place in just one Chittoor district in India. So that's the kind of importance that crop has in that region, and he didn't want the farmers who are growing mangoes to be given an unfair deal, basically. So a lot of times when we get, within the Amara Energy and Mobility, we stuck to our core and only did related diversifications. But as an entrepreneur, I think personal preference, personal interest sometimes is as important as something that makes business sense. Because if you have to have interest in what you're doing, you should like what you're doing, you should have passion for what you're doing.
Hope that answers the question. And I think with that, in any case, I think this has been highlighting all the time, the time's up, so taking a lot of time. But thanks so much for this, Jay. Very interesting and engaging conversation. Roshan, anything else, or we can conclude with this? Yeah, okay. Thank you so much.